Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, Mixed Ability Classes. My name is Luan, and I've been working in the TEFL industry for about 20 years almost. And honestly, I've loved every minute of it. I'm really happy to be here with you today to talk about this really important and often challenging topic. Before we get started, could you please pop your name and also where you're joining from? If you could please put that in the chat, that would be really, really great so that we can say hello and see where you're joining from today. So absolutely, I see those names coming in. That is fantastic. Put them in there. I want to say hi to you, right? So while those messages come through, just a quick reminder, today's session will focus entirely on mixed ability classes, not the course, not the assignments. Everything we cover today will relate specifically to this topic and also how to manage it effectively in your classrooms. I will be opening the Q&A session about halfway through the presentation, so about 30 minutes in. So I'd really appreciate it if you could hold on to those questions until then. That way I won't miss any of your questions and we can make sure that everyone gets a chance to have their questions answered. If, of course, I cannot answer your questions today or in today's session, maybe because of time or maybe because I just don't know the answer, then, of course, as you know, you can send those questions to tutor support, where we are all just waiting for your questions to come in every single day so that we can help you as much as we possibly can. All right, so I can see, oh, goodness me, those names have come in. So we've got people watching from Finland today. That is amazing. South Africa, Benoni. More South Africans. Hello to you. We've got someone from Mexico. That's so exciting. And also some watching from the UK. That is really, really great. So yes, even if you are joining right now, just pop your name and location. Chattanooga. Wow. Okay. So that's the exciting thing about TEFL. And I know I say this in every webinar, but that for me is the exciting thing about TEFL, right? On a daily basis, you're just saying hello to people from all corners of the planet. That is really, really exciting. But okay, let's get into today's topic. So as mentioned earlier, it's all about those mixed ability classes, right? So what is a mixed ability class? So I think before we look at how to manage it and before we look at activities that could work for mixed ability classes, let's have a look at exactly what it entails. All right, so I think an important place to start is, what are your students like in a mixed ability class? So in TESOL, it's very, very common to have a class with students that are at the same level, right? So that core level, that CEFR level, for example, pre-intermediate class, or you might have an elementary class, or you might have an upper intermediate class, right? So you've got your level, right? So let's go with pre-intermediate. But the students in that class could have mixed abilities, right? This means that some students may excel in some parts of language and struggle in others. I have literally had students that are almost, too good in grammar. And then when they've got to produce English in spoken form, they struggle. And then on the other side of it, you might have students who write exceptionally well, but then when they do a listening test, for example, they struggle. So those are the abilities that we're referring to here. So some of our learners' fluency levels could be really, really high, and they might be able to communicate, just about anything. And then their accuracy, the attention to detail, the focus on form and structure, well, that's where they could maybe struggle a little bit, right? So you've also got students who are, as I said earlier, very good in grammar, but maybe they need to improve their listening skills or their vocabulary skill set. So students, they also learn at different paces, right? So that's another way of looking at a mixed ability class. There's students who learn at different paces, and that's so normal, isn't it? If you think back to when you were at school, right? I mean, no two students are the same. Someone grasps something really, really quickly, whereas others might take a little longer to get there, and vice versa. So some need to repeat new information, or they need more time to process it, while others grasp new concepts really quickly. And even within that, you've got those students who maybe grasp certain concepts very quickly, but then other things take a little bit longer to process. I mean, it's such a mixed bag, right? Each of our learners will have their own challenges and their own strengths. And this makes a class look interesting and gives you a lot of scope for creativity. But on the other side, it can also be quite challenging for a teacher, particularly new teachers. And then what mixed ability students also look like? Let's have a look at motivation, right? It's also an important factor. The reasons your students have decided to study English will not be the same and will affect their motivational levels. So, see, teachers, you've got a lot to work with in one class. And I'm not even talking about those big classes of like 20 or 30 plus. I'm talking about even within a small class. You've got all these different mixed abilities. And I always say in the world of TEFL, never a dull moment, right? All right. So another aspect of the mixed ability class is location, where they could be from. So your EFL learners come from all over the world, and their exposure to the English language will differ as well as their educational backgrounds. So they will also be accustomed to certain teaching methods over others. So your methods might be new to them, or they might find something familiar, but something else is maybe a little difficult to get used to. So that for me was quite an interesting one when I started teaching, because I will tell you, my very first physical classroom, my very first face-to-face classroom was just such a mixed group. And in terms of location, I mean, they were just from everywhere. And that alone was a lot to factor into my lessons. So this is why we need various strategies to ensure all our students can enjoy the lessons and, of course, develop those English skills, right? So now we're going to look at a few approaches to help, but not only help the students, to help you as the teacher, because if anything, we just want to make your lives easier also. All right. So, something that I swear by, and you will see this popping up quite frequently in your course content, or just pick up a TEFL book and there it is, right? The needs analysis. So, what is a needs analysis? Well, finding out exactly what your students need at the end of the day. So, yes, it's a given that if they're sitting in your classroom, they want to learn English. But the needs analysis, it probes, it goes deeper. So having the information that you get out of a needs analysis, it really allows us to adapt our teaching methods and our lesson plans so that our students don't feel pulled back, or on the other hand, pushed too hard. It allows you to find that perfect balance. And there is such a thing, right? That's the good news. So the needs analysis is also useful to check on and monitor your learners' progress. I think that it's just such a useful tool. And I don't quite know, I will tell you, in my group of colleagues, people that I work with, people that I just come across in the world of TEFL, no one goes without the needs analysis. Everybody uses it. So in addition, what else does a needs analysis do? We've already spoken about the fact that it allows you to adapt your teaching methods, your lesson plans, so that your students don't feel overly challenged or pulled back. It also helps you track and check on your learners' progress. And then the other thing that a needs analysis can do is it helps you gain a good rapport with your students, to establish a good rapport with your learners. And I think that if you've got a good rapport, getting to know your students, allowing them to get to know you a little bit, right? It really helps your students feel supported, motivated, and confident. And that's only at the beginning of the lesson with you, right? So, a needs analysis, teachers, write this down. It is absolutely useful. It must form the part of every lesson planning strategy going forward. So, how do we do a needs analysis? So, the next few slides that we're going to look at is what a needs analysis needs to entail and how we set these up, right? So, how is a needs analysis done? So, you could go with the approach, the one on one interview. You can also use surveys and assessment tests. I like using the surveys because I find that students can actually get chatting a little bit. It makes it quite interactive. If you're working with only one student, this is also a great opportunity for you to assess level while getting to know what exactly they need, right? So as I said earlier, you can go with a one-to-one interview to find out what it is they need. You can use a survey. I like this one. And also something that I don't necessarily love, but it's necessary, is the assessment test. So it's beneficial to do a few of these evaluations during the course so that you can also see how students have progressed and how their needs might have changed. And I will tell you, teachers, their needs alter, their needs change. They go from needing this to needing a little bit more of that, a little bit less of that, and a whole lot of that. It's just the nature of the TEFL classroom. All right, so let's have a look at what we can also do to support our students, right? So in the classroom where there is a mixed bag of levels, when I say levels, competencies. So as mentioned earlier, some students might be very, very good in writing tasks. Some of them might need help with listening. Some of them might be excellent at listening, but they might need a bit of help with grammar or speaking. So we're back there to the mixed ability classroom. So something I want to say to you, and this goes for not only a mixed ability classroom, but any classroom, is that variety is key. So for accuracy-based activities, so remember, accuracy focuses on form, structure. It's very right or wrong, yes or no, controlled kind of practice, right? So for those activities, pair students who find these tasks difficult with students who excel at them. Because what you'll see happening is an exchange of information, questions being asked, right? Peer teaching. So I'm going to say that again. Peer teaching is a great way for students to review their knowledge and also retain it better while helping their classmates to enrich their understanding. My son is 16 years old and he is doing his IGCSEs at the moment, right? So it's a big exam. It's a very exam vibe in the household at the moment. But something that he likes to do is he comes to wherever I am and he sits down or he stands and he starts to teach me what it is he's studying. And I asked him, why do you do that? Tell me. I mean, I know, right? But I asked him, why is it that when you come and sit here with me, you actually go through the work with me as though you're teaching me? And he says, I don't know. It just helps me to remember it. And then when I write the exam, this information actually comes back. So I'm telling you, it's something that is so extremely useful. Peer teaching. Not only does it get them communicating, but it reinforces knowledge and helps them retain it better. And then also gives them that opportunity of showing off a little and producing it at a later stage, right? So that is for your accuracy-based tasks. Now let's have a look at those fluency-based tasks. So remember, teachers, accuracy is all form and structure, very controlled. Fluency is where you want them to produce language naturally, right? So when you set up your fluency-based activities, pair or group students who have similar strengths. That way they can work at the same pace and feel sufficiently challenged. Because what happens when there's uneven pairing is that the students who are struggling, they go quiet, or they feel disgruntled, or they feel frustrated because, oh, I don't know as much as that person knows, or that person is just taking over and I'm not really getting a chance to produce the little that I do have. So again, there's a difference here, right? You're seeing a bit of a shift with your accuracy-based tasks. pair students who find the tasks difficult with students who excel at them. But when we get to fluency, there's that like-minded approach, right? So pair or group students who have similar strengths so that they can all feel like they're more or less on the same page. Sufficiently challenged, nice pace, and a pace that they can work with, a pace that is familiar and feels comfortable. And that's not to say that, you'll have students who are just going for the activity and moving along really quickly. That's fine. They're all moving along quickly together. And those that are moving along a little slowly, that's also all right because they're all on the same page. So it works, right? So let's still continue with those fluency-based tasks, right? So if you have, think about it this way, the less proficient students can work at a comfortable speed and feel at ease to produce the language. That's just what we mentioned earlier, right? If I'm working with people who are at a similar level as me and know a similar amount of information, I can exhale and I can comfortably produce what I know, and I don't feel too overwhelmed by what it is that they know. So we feel like, yeah, we're a group that's working, we're a group that's gelling. Another benefit of getting to know your students is that you can make effective decisions when pairing them up by knowing who works well together. So that's all part of that rapport building. It's all part of that needs analysis. And then also the variety of tasks really gives you an indication of who works well together. I use this all the time. And you know what? A lot of us tend to want to force a situation where you see two students who do not work well together, so you put them in the same group because they just need to learn. That's not really always that effective. Pair students up with people who they feel comfortable with. Why? Because the objective is to produce language, right? So give them that opportunity. So we're still talking about those activities and we're still talking about variety. And the next thing we're going to look at is the range of activities that we can use, right? So variety, by having a variety of activities in our lessons, it caters to our learners' different needs and abilities, right? So different activities will also help students develop those 4 skills, which are, as you know by now, I'm sure, and if you don't, that's okay, you're going to learn it on the course. It's reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And then, of course, there are also those other skills like grammar and vocabulary. So when you use a variety of activities, what you're doing is not only giving them the ability to practice those skills, but you're also catering to all those different strengths and abilities and weaknesses in the classroom. And for me, that is such a gift when I know that each student is getting something out of the lesson. And this does not take a whole lot of planning, teachers. It's all quite doable. All right, so we are still on using a range of activities. And I love this because think about it, teachers, when you're at school, when you were at school, or maybe some of you are still in a language class or at university, if something is just too predictable, it just becomes, I don't know, I want to say the word boring, right? So in a TEFL class, in an ESL or EFL class, we try to add variety. And something that variety does is that it gives every student the opportunity to practice those areas that they need to improve, but they also get the chance to do well and feel confident. So say, for example, you're sitting in a language class and listening is not your thing, because I will tell you, confession, listening is not my thing, right? In a language class, I struggle with that skill. I'm okay with writing, I'm okay with speaking, listening is my weakness. But then my partner sitting next to me has got an issue with producing, speaking. The other one sitting opposite me just really struggles by putting a piece of cohesive text on paper. So we've all got those areas that we need to practice, right? So by using a range of activities, and honestly, you can incorporate quite a wide range of activities in one lesson. Every student has the opportunity to practice a weak area. I want to say weak, let's say that area that needs the opportunity, that needs to improve, they get the opportunity to do this. But then, as mentioned, also with that comes the bonus of doing well, and feeling confident. So you're killing lots of birds with one stone, right? And when we think about differentiation, so you heard me using this term a little bit earlier, right? This is something that is so necessary for us as teachers to really look into, read up about, do a little bit of research, because differentiation involves creating and planning tiered activities or different activities for our mixed ability learners. So, what that just means in simple terms is that you need to come up with activities or find activities that just gives everyone in your class a little something to practice, a little something to improve, a little something to enjoy, a little something to excel at. It's all possible. And this can involve extra work, some extra work, but if you keep your materials and build your own resource file, you'll thank yourself later on. So, like I said, yes, it takes a little bit of extra work. You've got to find materials, do a bit of research, told you that earlier, read up about this. But if you save all those resources, really you'll have quite a load of them to go to. It'll become your go-to file. And then you'll find later on, going forward, planning becomes a piece of cake, right? So let's say you're planning a reading lesson. So a lot of people tend to think that a reading lesson means the teacher reading to students. No, this is when you're going to be giving students a piece of text. They've got to read the piece of text and then in some kind of assessment show you what they've understood from that piece of text, right? That's what a reading lesson entails at the end of the day. So you're planning a reading lesson and you know that some of your learners really struggle with understanding texts, a piece of text, while others do really well at it. You could provide extra support materials for the learners who struggle, like visual aids or vocabulary support. And then the same goes for speaking and listening tasks. So think about it like this. When you start scaffolding, when you start building those tiers, right? We very seldom just give students a piece of text and say, right, read and tell me what you know. No, there's build up. There are visual aids. There are little conversations around the topic of that reading text. There is vocabulary that gets taught beforehand so that when they read the text, they don't struggle with those big words, right? And the reason we do that is just so that they can really fine tune the skill of what? The skill of reading. And like I said, the same goes when you're planning a speaking lesson or a listening lesson. So thinking about writing lessons, you could provide less proficient students with vocabulary prompts or sentence starters, or even if you're really starting from the bottom up, right? A gapped text where they've got to now start filling in the structures and the ideas and the vocabulary, and eventually getting closer to writing a full piece of cohesive text. There are ways to support your students. I remember when I was learning another language, I was just told, write a piece of text. I did not know where to start. That's why in our classes, we really just cater to all those different weaknesses, those strengths, things that students are struggling with. And it's all possible, right? To give every student that complete experience in the classroom. All right, so something that is also quite useful is that you can also provide different levels of difficulty in your worksheets, and you can use less complex language in the easier activities. Something I like to do is if I'm teaching a particular grammar point, I like to make the questions go from relatively doable to slightly more challenging. And then those students who are really flying with this grammar have a little bit of a challenge. And those who are struggling can just focus on the first few questions that are doable at their level. So you can actually also alter and play around with the levels of difficulty in your activities, in your worksheets. And then, like I said, also use less complex language when you're trying to make the activity a little bit less challenging. So as you can see, yes, it takes a little bit of work, but like I said, once you've done something and it's worked, oh, teachers, do yourself a favor, make a file and save that, right? Because you will be, it's not only students who recycle language. As a teacher, you can then recycle that piece of material and use it for numerous lessons going forward. And that reduces your planning time and gives you a little bit more free time. So see, work, what is it? Work smart, not hard. All right. Okay, so something else to consider with those mixed ability classes, open-ended activities. I love these, right? Because it really puts the focus on your students and almost removes you from the equation entirely. So since your students in mixed ability classes will work at different paces, structure your exercises in open-ended ways so that your students can complete as much as they are able to do without feeling too much pressure. And the stronger students will have the opportunity to practice more complex language. Do you remember on the previous slide, we were talking about worksheets, right? Playing around with the difficulty in your worksheets. So this is sort of something a little bit similar here. You are making the basis of your task nice and simple and achievable for those lower level students, but then it gets progressively harder, and the students that are not struggling also get the opportunity to feel a little challenged. So, for example, you could ask students to create a dialogue about a particular theme. You can ask, and this is rather than asking them, um, you know, you can really open it up. So rather than asking them to create a dialogue that should be a certain length and include specific language, you're opening it up a little bit and you're giving them more scope to produce to the level that they're comfortable with. And I find that this kind of task really makes your students relax into the task and relax into the language. And they feel a bit more confident with manipulating the language to suit the activity because they know that they're just going to produce what they know. And that immediately gives students that feeling in the classroom. And you too. All right, so asking students to create a dialogue about a particular theme, give them the topic, rather than asking them to create a dialogue that is a very specific length and including very specific language. That immediately puts those barriers there and makes them feel like, oh, goodness me, I've only got to do that. And what if I don't know enough? Well, if you give them the theme, they have that liberty to just throw in the language that they know and that they feel comfortable with. I hope that makes sense. All right, so moving on. And these are those students that finish early. And teachers, it's fantastic, but it can be terrible at the same time, right? But we've got solutions for you. So for those students that finish before the rest of the class, have tasks to make sure that they stay engaged in the lesson and to enrich that understanding and use of English. So if it's a listening activity, you could have them do extra vocabulary practice to further their understanding. For a reading task, you could give them questions to exploit the text further. And this also frees up your time to assist those learners who are struggling with an activity. I always say, have an extra little challenge in your back pocket, and when people finish quickly, you can give it to them. And I always remember when I was just 6 years old, so this is taking you way back, I was very good at puzzles, right? Jigsaw puzzles. Very, very good at them. I can't lie. And what happened was my teacher saw this, and she'd give everybody, each student, a puzzle to do in a certain amount of time. But I always noticed I got given two, because when I finished, I then very swiftly moved on to the next one. And this is just something that I realized, and it stuck with me. I was 6 years old. I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was, but I was 6 years old, and I remember my teacher doing that. And that just shows me that she was using that intuition. This one finishes quickly. I've got an extra challenge in my back pocket for her. We do the same in our EFL classes. Also think about extra tasks as homework or practice outside lessons will help those less advanced students, to build up those skills. If students struggle with speaking or listening, you can give them small tasks in the real world. For example, go to a library, go to a bookstore, and find out if they have the following books. If you go to a restaurant or a cafe this weekend, order your own food and ask the waiter about the specials. If they're watching films or a series, that could be another good way of really extending those listening skills, and then have a little conversation about the series or the movie that they watched with them, just to see what they can produce. So there are these little real world tasks that students really enjoy because it brings the language to life and it makes them feel like, hey, I can do something. I'll never forget the feeling of ordering something in another language. It felt amazing. So give your students that opportunity also. Right, now before we finish, something important to mention is correction. How we correct our students in mixed ability classes. Now, if we've got to be careful with this in a class where everybody is just pretty much on the same level, imagine how much more careful we have to be if our students are at different levels, right? Or have different abilities or different strengths. So you might find that the students who find accuracy difficult, they might make more mistakes. And it's better not to single out these mistakes, as this really can break your students' confidence and demotivate them. So I like to do group correction. I will walk around and I will not expose who's made a mistake. The only time I will get involved is if they're trying to reach a goal and there are a couple of mistakes that are inhibiting the progress. That is where I would maybe step in and I'd have to correct. But other than that, correction is a community thing, right? So I walk around, I write their mistakes in my little book, and afterwards I would write some of these mistakes down. I would reword some of the vocabulary, and I would have them as a group figure out what went wrong. Do not name and shame. Very often those students do know who they are, but you've not humiliated them and you've not broken their confidence in any way. So the idea is to correct them without exposing the person who made the mistake. Taking notes of the whole class's errors, writing them on the board afterwards, as I said earlier, is a great way to manage this. So students won't necessarily know who made the error, but they can also practice self-correction as they find and correct the errors themselves. And I find that very often, as I mentioned earlier, the person that made the mistake, they'll know it was them, but they are not embarrassed in any shape or form, and rather thankful that you've picked up the mistake and actually corrected it for them. So, yeah, I think that mixed ability classes really just throw you in at the deep end a little bit. But as you can see, in all the slides and the notes that we've gone through today, there are solutions for all these anticipated problems, right? So just to conclude, it can be fun. Mixed ability classes can be fun and a really productive, interesting experience for your students. And I really hope that these tips will help you create that collaborative environment where your students can really help each other grow in their language skills. Because I always say the best props, the best examples, the best, it's your students. That's where it all comes from. So use them, right? And creating activities for those mixed ability classes just gives your students that opportunity to shine, right? These strategies should also help you design activities that will benefit all of your students and really just give them that opportunity to produce what it is they know and learn on a daily basis. So that is the end of me talking to you And now you have the opportunity to ask your questions. So I see lots and lots more names came in from London, from the UAE, more from South Africa, Washington, USA, Serbia, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and we also have from Heidelberg. So hello to all those that came in a little bit later on. But you're just in time for Q&A. So if you've got any questions, if you want to test drive any activities that you've been thinking about, if you have any questions about any of the information that we've put on the slides today, please do ask, type your questions in the chat right now, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible. All right, I am going to, in the meantime, scroll up a little bit to see whether I've missed anything. All right, so a very good question, and I always appreciate this. Let's just put on the Q&A slide so those who just joined can actually see that we're doing Q&A. Okay, so thank you for your question, but could you tell, please, are you talking about classroom or online groups, and what size are they about? All, right? So if you're looking at a one-to-one, okay, differentiation is to cater for different learning styles, but within one student, there might be different learning styles. A student might be okay with one skill and struggling with another. So you come up with activities that would cater to all those needs. Then on a larger scale, if you've got more students, of course, yes, then you've got to incorporate more activities to stimulate all those various needs, right? So it's for all sizes, and it's definitely for online and face-to-face. So to answer your question, I do both. I've got online students, I've got face-to-face students, and I have to do this with both those. When it comes to online learners, the process is exactly the same. Your lessons have a very similar structure to a face-to-face, so you'd also have to come up with a range of activities to pique those interests and to get your students producing what it is they need to produce. If you're teaching one-to-one, then the needs analysis that I spoke about earlier on the first couple of slides, very, very useful. In fact, if you look at our short courses, our TEFL Academy short courses, you'll see that in almost every single short course, I think maybe in every course, it starts with the needs analysis to come up with activities that help students with their weak points, to help them practice those strong points, and also in slightly bigger groups, whether it be online or whether it be face-to-face, to help them practice all those skills. So to answer your question, online and face-to-face, one-on-one and group classes. All right, could you please type more questions in the chat so that I can answer them? Now is your moment. And feel free to ask questions about activities that you've been thinking about doing, activities that you're not sure about. If you've got questions about the needs analysis, please ask, because it's so important that when you have a mixed ability class, that yes, you're one teacher, but you're catering for all the different needs, and you're trying to stimulate your students, and you're trying to make everybody feel included. That inclusive environment is so important, and that's where all these pointers of today would come in. All right, so we've got a great question here. How do we know what level the student is at? Is there a test page? Okay, so there are a couple of scenarios here that we need to look at before we get into the answer, right? So if you're working at a language center, students arrive on a weekly basis almost, and they walk in on a Monday morning, and then they do something called a level placement test. That level placement test has got a variety of vocabulary and grammar and use of English questions. There might even be a listening slot that they've got to do. They might even have to speak for a little while. But at the end of the day, those scores are calculated and a happy medium is found. And that student is then placed into the CEFR level that corresponds with what they can produce and what they got right in the test. So remember that it's a level placement test. Now, if you're teaching one-to-one, there are numerous level placement tests that you can find online, right? Excuse me. One I use often, I think it's called the Oxford Level Placement Test. I love this one because it's quick. You can print it, you can send it to your students, and you can absolutely calculate their scores on the spot. And the score that they get will tell you exactly what level they're in. But Lucia, I would say not only the level test, have a speaking test with them, ask them questions about the past, the present, the future, their daily lives, their work. See how far the vocabulary goes so that you also know where to start in terms of vocabulary. At lower levels, I will tell you that vocabulary and grammar are more aligned. Um, a student who is at a lower level knows a certain amount of vocabulary and a certain amount of grammar. As they go higher in level, those two can start shifting, where their knowledge of vocabulary goes sky high, but maybe grammar is not so strong, and vice versa. That's where things get a little bit tricky. But at the end of the day, a level placement test, one you can find free online, works wonders. A really good starting off point for any teacher, whether you're working with a group, face to face, or online, or one to one. Covers everybody. All right, so we've got a question from Edward. Thank you for your question, Edward. How do you encourage students to push on in open-ended and group activities if they have different levels of motivation and participation? So this is really a really, really great question, because Edward, it is something so real that happens in the classroom, where you might think as a teacher you've got the most dynamite, amazing activity, you put them in groups and you're thinking they're just going to take this topic and run, and then it gets stuck. And the reason it gets stuck is because maybe there are just one or two students contributing and going for it while the others are not quite there, or they are not as motivated. So a lot of work goes into choosing topics that are appropriate and relevant to the lives of your class, right? So if you've got students at a certain level, at a certain age, maybe if they're students on a holiday, they'll have different interests to students in a business English class, or, if it's a general English class, look at the age group, look at the interests, and find topics that really get them thinking and get them wanting to produce, right? So there's that. Topic is important. Make the topic relevant and make the activity, Edward, as real life relevant as possible. Something that they've got to go and do outside, bring it into the classroom. It might be ordering something in a restaurant. It might be asking for directions. It might be asking for someone's recommendation on a movie, a theater, a language school, or a language course, an app. They might discuss a language app, which one works best. So immediately, when there is an interest, and when the topic or the task becomes real life, there's interest. Even those students who are not as forthright with information, they might not be that talkative, even they see the sense there. And then also look at those pairings, rewatch this webinar when it comes out, look at the pairings that we have suggested in open-ended or fluency-based activities. Make sure that they are on a similar level and similar abilities, similar interests, because that also gets them going, right? Something that I will definitely not push is those whole presentation style activities where they've got to present information to the rest of the class. I find those a little counterproductive. I like activities where they've got to relay real life information, because they then, without you telling them this is important, they see the importance of it and they go for it. I also find that activities where if it's a discussion activity and I give them discussion questions, the important thing is to make your questions really vary in intensity. So maybe, for example, the first few questions are really bound to the topic, and as they go on, the questions become a little bit more open. And that gives everybody, even those that won't have experience on the exact topic, it gives them the opportunity to engage. So, say for example, you're talking about maybe the reading is about markets around the world, different markets. And now you want them to discuss markets and things that they buy and like and that sort of thing. And initially, maybe your first few questions are about markets from around the world. But now you've got some students who are maybe not that interested, or you've got some students who haven't been to that many places to see all these amazing markets. So now the questions can become more like, if you had a market stall, what would you sell? Is there something you can make that you can sell? When you go to a market, what is the first thing you want to buy? What do you think about the pricing in the markets of the town or the city where we are today? So encourage them by giving them questions that every single person can answer and enjoy. I hope that helps a little. That was a lot of information. I hope it helps. Right. Okay, let's have a look here. So we've got a question from Ilsa. I've just learned about the vocab kitchen. Oh, Ilsa, that vocab kitchen is going to be your best friend for the rest of your life. Would this be useful in a mixed ability class? Yes. So in a mixed ability class, remember we said earlier that some students might be very strong in vocabulary and others not. So the vocab kitchen is a fantastic website that grades language or puts language in different categories. So it'll tell you that the word giggle is a C2 level word, while the word laugh is an A1 or A2 level word. So it'll tell you at what level the different words are so that you know when talking to this group, what words can you use? So you know, okay, my students are really low. I'm not going to use the word giggle just yet. I'll say laugh, or she laughed quietly, or they laughed at a joke just between themselves. So it gives you the opportunity to grade your language. And I love grading my language because I feel it's necessary to use wording that your students understand. The minute you use words and phrases and even grammar that they don't understand, they feel disconnected from the lesson. And Vocab Kitchen is a great tool to help you with language grading. Save it, bookmark it, Ilsa, never let it go. All right, let's have a look. Okay, so Eloise, there's some information on the online course about needs analysis. Please have a look. And then also, if you're doing any of our short courses, and I do suggest that you do, if you're doing a level 5 course, it might already be included in your package. If you're not doing a level 5, do check what your options are in terms of the short courses, because there's a lot of work on the needs analysis. I mean, they give examples, they tell you what questions to ask, they tell you how to format your questions, lots and lots of useful stuff. I was teaching a group of business students not too long ago, and I quickly went onto the TEFL Academy site to use some of the needs analysis questions because they're so great, they're so useful, and they're so relatable. Easy to adapt, easy to grade. So please have a look on our site, your course content that is, and then also have a look into the short courses because there's a lot on the needs analysis, because those short courses are meant for those niche areas like business English teaching, young learners, online learners. So where those needs analysis are absolutely necessary, that's exactly where you'll find lots and lots of information. And then also ask us on tutor support, and we can send you a couple of links where you can find some information on the needs analysis, whether it be in our course or whether it be using external resources. So please send us a note at tutor support and we'll get onto that for you. All right. So this one might be a little difficult because it's very specific to location here. What is the best way to manage different English levels in a single UAE class with many nationalities? Whoa, that's a loaded question. And I'll tell you why. Usually when you're working at a language center or a school, your students are at a similar CEFR level. It's very unlikely that you're going to have upper intermediate students and elementary students in one class. The school knows that they're doing themselves and the students a disservice if they put students of really drastic and different levels in one classroom, right? So your students are likely to have a very similar level. It's the different abilities that you're looking at and that we're trying to help you with here today. So I'm going to urge you to please rewatch this webinar, take some notes, because we do give advice on how to manage those different abilities in the classroom. When it comes to different actual levels in the classroom, well, this is a difficult one because, like I said, the reason we have different CEFR levels is so that we know in which level to put the student. In other words, in which class to put the student. And like I said earlier, it is unlikely that in one class you're going to have very different levels like beginner and upper intermediate. I would almost say that I've never been in a situation like that before where I've had such different levels. If you're working in a private capacity and you've got 3 or 4 students that have applied together to come to your classes and they are at very different levels, I will absolutely suggest that you give them one-on-one lessons, because it is very difficult to manage different levels in the classroom. So please have a look at some of the notes that we've gone over in terms of mixed abilities. But when it comes to different levels, your students should be of a similar level when they're sitting in front of you in the classroom. All right. So we've got a question here, and we spoke about this. I'm so happy you asked. I was wondering for an activity you could perhaps take the students to a nearby market, a restaurant, or give them some real world experience. So we spoke about that a little bit earlier. On one of the slides, we mentioned making activities, outside activities, where students can actually go and achieve something. You could either tell them to go and do it themselves, like tell them to go to a library, tell them to go to a little cafe and order something themselves, or yes, you could make it a class excursion. Why not, right? But again, something that I feel is important that you should note is if it's at a school, check the policy of the school. Are you allowed to take the students out? And if you do, where can you take them? What should safety precautions, that sort of thing. Do any forms need to be signed by the students, by parents, by guardians, by the school authorities? There's a little bit of homework to do. However, if you're teaching in a completely private capacity, or your students are adults and you're welcome to take them out, oh yes, I encourage something like this. It's wonderful. You could take your students to a coffee shop and tell them, right, so now we're going to look at the menus, we're going to call the waiter, and we're going to order something. So that might be something interesting. A market. I know that a teacher here in Cape Town, we've got lots of markets. We like markets, right? So a teacher I know got permission from the school and took her adult students to a nearby market where they had to haggle. I know in some cultures, haggling is not okay, and in many cultures, you absolutely have to haggle, right? So she took them to, well, it was a group of teachers. They took them to a nearby market and they told students, don't accept the first price, haggle, negotiate a little bit. So they practiced that skill, the skill of negotiation. It was a wonderful exercise. Some people bought something, some didn't. But at the end of the day, lots of English was spoken, because I will tell you, when your students go up to a vendor at a market, they've got to speak in English. They've got to survive in English. So it pushes everybody out of their comfort zone, but also allows them to practice something that they've maybe learned in the class with you a little bit earlier. So yes, I absolutely recommend it, but always check the policy of the school and that you're allowed to take your students out, because yes, then it can be absolutely wonderful. All right. Any other questions? Or have I missed anything? If I've missed something, please retype it or just repost it so that I don't miss it. But if you have any other questions about the mixed ability class, please do ask. And I don't know if I'm able to type the profiler, the vocab kitchen profiler that one of you asked about a little bit earlier. I've put it in the chat. It's something that I use every day to just check the level of words. So say, for example, I'm planning a lesson and I want to describe something to my students, maybe to set the scene. I would type my description into the vocabulary profiler, and I would then see the level of the words that I'm planning to use and whether they're okay for the level of my students. All right. Des, you've said also from the last question before mine, the last question before yours, I did answer. Um, let's see. Okay, so we've got another one here. Let's put it on the screen for everybody to see. Is it normal for schools to have a TA, teacher's assistant? Is that what you're referring to here? Um, okay, if you can just clarify that for me, also so that the rest of the group knows exactly what you're referring to. Please, if you could just clarify that question for us so that we can answer that for you. All right. Any other questions? Put them in. Okay, so Des, I think you've confirmed that. Is it normal for schools to have a teacher's assistant of a student with a higher IV than the class? Okay, so some schools do have teacher's assistants, and that is just to be an aid to the TEFL teacher or the English teacher, to assist them in terms of language barriers and so on. However, it's not a given. So when you do apply for jobs, for example, in some cases there might be a teacher's assistant, and in some cases there might not. The benefits of having a teacher's assistant is that if your students are at a very, very low level, then of course, it can become a bit of a challenge with the language barrier. There might be a little emergency. There might be something that you really have to sort out, but you don't know what students are trying to say or what they're asking. In that sense, a teacher's assistant can step in and help you. They also help with the lesson planning, they help with the classroom management, specifically if the class is quite a big one, right? So a teacher's assistant is useful in that sense. On the other side, I like the idea of total immersion in my classes, right? So my students are to depend on English, ask questions in English, and survive in English. And having a teacher's assistant can sometimes give you that little bit of a crutch to lean on. But I find that either way works. I'm not sure, though, whether this is a given in all schools. So do check what the situation is when you apply. All right. Any other questions? Okay. I can't see any questions coming through yet. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, we have sort of come to the end. Let's just see. Okay, there's one more coming in, and we have time. So, how to entice the least or the least able or keen student to speak in a mixed class. So, remember earlier we mentioned that placing students in a lot of people tend to think that if a student is not so forthcoming with information, or they're not that keen, or they're not that communicative, put them with someone who is. No, don't do that, right? Because what happens is the one student might give too much and the other one then feels less able and does not want to produce. It might overwhelm them a little bit. So if you've got a group setting, pair students who are a little bit similar in terms of energy and motivation and what they give. But also, I will tell you that it's not, and this might seem a little bit strange, it's not so much about the student, it's about the tasks you create in order to pull that student out of their shells. So I had a student in my class like this, and I thought, wow, the student just doesn't want to give anything. The student doesn't want to talk during the speaking activities. The other students are going for it, and there's almost too much noise. And then there's this little island in the middle of the class that does not want to produce. And then what I did was the needs analysis. I sat with my students, I listened to them, I asked them questions. I found out that the student has got very particular interests. So what I did was Clever. I started, well, not me so much, but the methodology, right? I started integrating the students' interests into the lessons so that there were questions that I knew they could answer. And I also gave, by the way, giving your students a bit of preparation time, giving them time to process information before expecting them to answer. But I will tell you that when you've got students who are not that keen, right? Have a little bit of a needs analysis, see what they like, see what they want. Let them write you a blank check and give you that information so that at the end of the day, you can take that information, put it into those lessons, and get them to come out and produce the language that they know. I hope that helps. We've also got a few webinars on communicative approaches, our podcasts on communicative approaches in the class, how to get students to talk. Oh, please watch those, listen to those. Lots and lots of researched and useful information in there. All right, so I've got a very nice comment, and you know what? I'm going to put that one right there. I'm happy. This was very informative. Thank you. You're absolutely welcome. It's what we're here for, right? So something you've got to do for me is please fill in the survey, right? Because, oh, you're welcome. The survey is so important. It tells us what you like. It tells us where you're at in terms of these webinars and how you feel during them. So in addition to having the survey on the screen, which I will open up and enlarge in a second, I'm also going to put the survey link in the chat. Okay, there it is. If you've already filled it in, just try again. If it tells you you filled it in, thank you for trying again. But please do fill in the survey. It really is super useful. So thank you very much for attending. It was wonderful spending this hour with you on a Saturday. I do hope that you join next time. Please remember these webinars are weekly. They're all included in your package already, so make use of them, right? And if you can't find them, send us a message to Tutor Support and we will send you the link where you can just browse and go through as many of them as you like. All right, so this one will be available in a couple of days, and then you're able to watch and rewatch as many times as you need to. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next time.